My name is Roger Lin, and I'm currently a master's student in McGill University in the Department of Chemical Engineering. So the topic for today is how to combat climate change in a sustainable way. And the method is what we're currently doing in the lab is electrochemical CO2 reduction. So first, let me introduce a little bit about our lab. So in our lab, we have two groups. So one is the experimental part, and the other one is doing computational modeling. So the two are complementary, so they help each other. The experiments supply data to computation parts, and the computation will give guides, and some insights about some experiments. And so during our spare time, we have group events. So we have like some trips, and we have a lot of presentations, and then we go to conferences. So it's a really fun experience for me so far. And what's the most interesting part about our lab and the work we did in our group is that we are using catalytic and functional materials and doing something really interesting, because we are trying to convert electrical energy to chemical energy. And so it is an energy conversion process, and it is very green, because what we are doing is essentially carbon neutral, and that provides one of the solutions to the CO2 increasing and the global warming today. I will talk about that later. So what you expect from my presentation is that I will go over some background of the story, so the climate change and what we are facing today, and also how can we solve it? So there are various methods, and one of them is by electrochemistry. That's what we're doing. And also we will talk about some catalyst synthesis, so very cutting edge science, and also reactor design, a little bit more about engineering, and then the experiment we're doing, also what we can improve in the future. And then I would touch a little bit up on my personal journey, so my undergrad and my internship and stuff like that. So if you have questions in the end, feel free to ask me. So let's start off with the issue we have today. So the climate change is real, and we have, of course, the natural composition of that. So it happens in nature, even without human being. But now it's enhanced so much by our emission of the greenhouse gases. So it becomes like a positive feedback loop. So it increases, and then we have more ice melting and the sea level increasing and less reflection. And so then the greenhouse effect becomes more enhanced. So this is causing a lot of extreme weathers. So we want to control it. We want to return everything back to normal. So what is the cause of climate change? I'm sure most of you already know it's greenhouse gases, yes. And then if you look at the composition of the greenhouse gases, the contribution of the greenhouse gases, you can see is carbon dioxide. That's the main factor. So there are approximately 33 gigaton of carbon dioxide global emissions, and they are mostly through fossil fuel burning and agriculture and deforestation. So we want to solve this problem. So how can we reduce the CO2 levels in the atmosphere, where we can capture it and convert it and then produce some useful products, or we can store it in somewhere like a sequestration, so it won't be in the atmosphere again. And of course, if we want to convert it back to the fuel form or some useful products, and it will be burned and it will emit again. But in the end, we'll try to achieve carbon neutral, which means we're not using extra carbon source from the fossil fuel. That's the ultimate goal. And so what are some of the benefits in doing this carbon capture and utilization compared to carbon capture and sequestration is that we can maximize the use of the fuel. So we don't need to store it, because if we store it in the geological location, let's say, or under the ocean, there is some potential damage that can be done to the geological aspect. So there are a few methods we can do with the utilization, the CCU. So there's thermal catalysis, you can grow algae or some other bacteria, and we can do carbon mineralization, so make it into bricks and concrete. And what we are doing in our lab is CO2 electrocatalysis. So this is, the name is called CO2RR. So let's talk a bit about this interesting process. So we have a lot of possible products in this conversion. So we can convert CO2 into formic acid, into carbon monoxide, into methane, ethylene, and some biofuel like ethanol and propanol. So there's a lot of possibility out there. And some of the benefits from this process is that we can capture intermittent and excessive renewable energy because we're using electricity. So electricity can be generated by solar panel, wind turbine, geothermal, or any other renewable sources. So they don't have carbon emission, so not from coal burning, obviously. And so from these renewable sources, sometimes the issue is that they are not very consistent. Let's say solar panel. So it changes every day, every season. So it depends on your location. So it is not a consistent energy source. So what we want to do is we can use the excessive or the intermittent energy and we store it into the chemical form, like the biofuel. So that in that case, we can use it later when we need it. So it doesn't have to be a consistent energy source and we can provide a solution of storing it. So that's one of the biggest benefits for doing electrocatalysis on CO2. And that's also brings another prospect that we can use the energy converted from electricity to the chemical, and it has higher efficiency than through other methods like thermal or some other processes. So from here, it's also clear that what we are doing, because it's not a thermal catalysis, so we don't need high temperature, high pressure. So we save a lot of extra energy doing this setup. We just need the potential difference and we need the electrochemical cell. So if you look at the CO2R process, if you just do some research on it, it's actually really complicated. It has a lot of proposed mechanism. So, and I would not go over this because this is very complicated and it's still sometimes a lot of different proposals. So, but what's the nature of CO2R is that if you remember your very simple chemistry, so in CO2 molecule, the carbon has +4 oxidation state. So it's the most oxidized form. And that's why CO2 is so stable and it doesn't react with a lot of stuff. But with electrochemistry, we can reduce it back to the hydrocarbon, so +1 or +2 or even 0 oxidation states, depending on the composition. So then it has the potential to be oxidized again. That's the process when we use it for energy, when we burn it. So in the end, we're just kind of recycling. We're changing the carbon states and we're harvesting energy from it. So this is the nature of CO2R. And there are both experimental part and computational parts about it. And that's why we have the two groups for this process. So if you recall what is electrochemistry or what is electrocatalysis, and it's that if you remember, we have two kind of electrochemical cells. We have the galvanic cells and we have the electrolytic cells. So what we're doing here is the electrolytic cells because we are using electrical energy and doing chemical reaction. So this is the fundamentals about electrolytic cell. So there are some characteristics. We need the electrode, obviously. This should be conductive materials. So like metals or some kind of carbon. And also we need the aqueous solution with ions. So the ions are the electrolytes that can carry charges. And also we will need obviously the energy input, which is the electric source. And there are some key concepts about this, very fundamental stuff in electrochemistry, the Faraday law, some simple circuitry, so resistance, current, voltage, and capacitors. And I think you can learn a lot about this in your just physics class. And also it is a heterogeneous reaction. So if you're not sure what this means, it means there are more than one phases. So obviously the electrode is in solid form, as in the solid phase, and the liquid is in liquid phase. The electrolyte is in liquid phase. So on the interface, there's two different phases. So it's not homogeneous. So homogeneous is everything in the same bulk, so in the same solution. But here it's a surface reaction, so it's heterogeneous. And if you're interested in that, there's a lot of fun things happening in heterogeneous reactions. And this, I think, will go into more chemistry and material science. So this is a very simple example on the right-hand side. If you can see the cathode and anode reaction equation. So we have CO2, because on the cathode, let's recap, it is doing reduction. So that's where the CO2 molecule will bind to. So the CO2 and water with the electron provided in the circuit will turn into useful products. In this example, ethylene, one of the, it can be a fuel and also can be a precursor for a polymer. So one of the very important products in CO2RR. On the anode, we're doing oxidation. So we're just doing something we call oxygen evolution reaction. So it's basically producing oxygen. And we'll talk a bit more about anode, because now we're just focusing on cathode. That's where all the interesting stuff happening with the CO2 being reduced. So there's certain metrics in electrocatalysis. The most important ones are Faradic efficiency, current density, and onset potential. So these terms are very huge terms, so it's probably hard to understand, but if you translate it into a very simple term, so you probably know that in a chemical reaction, we have product selectivity, which means you have some side product that you don't want, and you have your desired product that is the goal of the reaction. And that the key product, the desired product, is sometimes not 100% because you have other stuff going on. So selectivity is the measure of what's the percentage of the product, of the desired product overall. So that is Faradic efficiency. And the current density is that it's current over area. So that means if you scale up the electrode cell, if you scale it up to larger surfaces, this should be kept the same because it's normalized with the area. And what it actually shows, the current, is that if you know that all the chemical reactions, they're actually just electron transfer, right? So if you know the amount of electron transfer, which is the current, then you know how much the product is being produced. So what is the reaction rate, essentially? So this is actually kinetics. And then there's onset potential, which is the minimum energy input you need to start the reaction. So in these terms, I think you can probably understand more about this process. So there are also other metrics. They're not as significantly contributing to the part, but they're also important in terms of the full process. So when we industrialize this, everything will be important. And but in the lab, what we're focusing more is the first three. So on the right-hand side, you can see a little graph. That's one of our experiment last year, and we're doing CO2R on copper oxide particle deposited on carbon paper. So I will talk about how we synthesize this catalyst, and you can see that it produces a lot of stuff, right? So you have almost everything I just mentioned in the previous slides, propanol, ethanol, and other stuff. And then you realize this one hydrogen, which is actually not a CO2 reduction product because it doesn't have any C, it doesn't have any carbon in it. And where does it come from? It's actually from water splitting. So when you do CO2R, one of the side reactions is that you also produce hydrogen. So we want to minimize that as much as possible. That's one of the goals. So now we can talk a bit about catalyst. It is very fascinating because that's the centerpiece of the whole thing. And if you have really robust catalyst and you build your reaction system around it, and that is where you start to scale up your process and you start to make it more industrial applicable. So the catalyst type, we have pure metals. That's almost the simplest one, but you can do a lot of fancy stuff with that. You can modify the surface. You can do a lot of deposition and doping with non-metal parts. And then you have the metal nanoparticles on the conductive substrates, let's say carbon paper, one of the most common ones. So this is the reason we want to lower the cost of the process, because if you use the whole metal, there's a lot of atoms in the middle that doesn't do anything. They just conduct electricity. So if you want to maximize the use of the metal, we should use some nanoparticles, which has a large surface to volume ratio. And it's actually being saying that we have the maximum use of each metal particle, each metal atoms even. So that is the major catalyst type in a lot of papers and a lot of study nowadays. And also we have metal organic frameworks. And this works as kind of like you have the organic parts like a cage, and then the metal atom is in the middle. And so you're engineering, you're designing the catalyst shape so that it has something interesting. It has some properties that you want. And also there's non-metal catalyst. So it just graphene or some other dope carbon. So they are not containing any metal parts, but they can still do a lot of reaction. But this is, I think, that probably the least used because it still has some challenges. But it's a really interesting aspect to think about. And so what is the functions of a catalyst? So if you remember, a catalyst by definition is that it changes the activation energy of a desired reaction. So hopefully it lowers the activation energy so that we are facilitating the reaction. And it also modifies, because of this energy change, it also modifies the reaction pathways. So if you don't have catalyst, maybe you will have the product A because it has a lower activation energy. But if you have a catalyst, it can perhaps lower the path to B, the energy required to go to path B. So then you're changing the reaction pathways. And also a purpose for the molecule, in this case CO2, to bind on the surface. So this providing a surface for them to react. So this is the fundamental functions about catalysts. So in terms of synthesizing catalysts, there are also a lot of different ways. So the most common one is deposition by vapor. So in low pressure vacuums, we can evaporize or excite metal ions or metal molecules, metal atoms, and then we deposit on a piece of substrate, either polymer or some conductive materials like carbon paper. then it forms a layer of the metal in like nanoparticle forms. So that is essentially what we're doing in the lab. And then this gives a really good surface, really uniform surface condition. And then also we have electrode deposition, which is just done by electrochemistry. So we reduce the metal containing salts in the solution, and then it becomes metal atoms or metal like clusters on your substrate. And also we have something called incipient wetness, which is a weird term. It means that we're using some reduction agent to reduce the metal salt and then becomes metal. So on the right hand side, this is actually the incipient wetness method. So when we reduce the salt in the solution, it becomes like this very flurry. It's actually metal atoms, carbon particles. And then we centrifuge it, we get rid of the clear liquid part and just wait for the solid part to dry. And then we prepare an ink using some solvent, and then we deposit it, we drop cast it on a piece of carbon paper. So the lower image shows the drop casted carbon paper. And once it's dry and calcinated, it becomes uniform surface, and we can use it as the catalyst. And there's also other methods like hydrothermal methods or chemical reactions even. And there's just multiple ways to prepare your catalyst. And in all of these methods, how do we decide which one works the best for us? And that is the part where the experiments and the computation combine. So we can do a lot of experiments, we can try different things and see what works and what not. But we can also model it on computational method. So using something called density functional theory, and we can do some calculation on it and make some assumption, and then we can get some insights, and then that can lead the experiment and how we produce it, which way is the best. So this is a very interesting stuff, and if you're interested in this, you can ask me a question on this later. And then now let's talk about more about the engineering part. So the reactor modes, there are very modes have. So first we can do it in a beaker. So we can just put two electrode in a beaker, just like perhaps what we all did in the middle school, right? Copper and zinc in the solution, and then just give some current, and the copper will be deposited and the zinc will be oxidized. So this is one of the very simple ways. But the problem is that because we're reducing CO2 into some organic parts, organic molecules, and they can migrate to the other side, to the anode, and become oxidized again. So this is not good. We're effectively doing nothing if we put it in the same beaker. So we want to separate the two electrodes. So we use something called H-type cells. So it's the first row image. So you can see that it's two chamber with a membrane, an ion exchange membrane separating the two. So only small ions can go through. So not the molecule and not the products we want. So in that case, we can really do CO2R without compromising the product. So another method to do it is the same idea, to separate it into multiple chambers. But because we're doing CO2 reaction, so it is in gas phase, right? So we want to maximize the CO2 concentration on the catalyst. So we can have two chambers on the cathode. So one chamber is just CO2, and the other side, remember, we always need electrolyte. So we have CO2 on one side and electrolytes on the other side, and in between is the catalyst. And then we have the anode just for producing oxygen. So then it's a multi-chamber cell. And in this, we can also make it continuous. So we can pump it, we can pump the liquid and the gas through the chambers and recycle the liquid. So this way it is a recycling and continuous reaction mode, and it can be really easy to scale up. So that's the benefit of flow cell. And so there are a lot of experimental characterization we can do. So this is supposed to give us the idea of what we're expecting from the system or from the reaction, where we should start our experiment, and how we can carry out the actual conversion. So in here, we're not too concerned about the conversion, but we're looking at the system characterization. So one of the most common thing is cyclic voltammetry, which is scanning through the system with different voltage, so different applied potentials. So this gives us some idea about the oxidation and reduction condition. So if you look at the right image, this is actually a CV for CO2R on the copper particle. So this is, you can see it's negative current on towards the left, because this is a reduction current by convention. So it means it's doing some useful work. So there's current, so there's reaction. So here we have a linear, almost kind of relationship between the voltage and the current. So this means we're doing useful work, and by changing potential, we can increase the speed of reaction. So this is the region we want to work in. And then on the right, towards the right, you have the flat zero current situation. That means it doesn't have any useful reaction, and it's not perhaps the places we want to work on, because it doesn't have any reaction. So this gives us idea of the window we want to work in. And the linear sweep potential, linear sweep voltammetry, or the LSV, is essentially taking one part of the CV and look at the change of the current in regards to the potential. So it's a part of the CV that we can focus on and to identify the change of the reaction. And then we have also some other process to measure the resistance, because remember, it's almost like a circuitry. So we have to know the resistance of the circuit, because there's some extra energy input for us to just overcome the impedance or the resistance. And then we have also some characterization for this active surface area or the capacitance of the catalyst. So these are some of the most common methods that we can do to characterize the electrochemical aspect of the catalyst. And also we can use a lot of physical characterization, like electromicroscopic methods, to just look at the surface and see what is it like. Is it like a flat sheet, or is sphere, or is column, or is even wire like? So those are physical methods. So once we know the catalyst, we can do conversion experiment now. So we can use basically two methods to do that. One is we control the voltage. So we give a fixed voltage, and then we can look at the current over a long period of time. And let's say 2-3 hours, then we can collect our sample, and we can do the component analysis in the product. And we know, okay, for the past 3 hours, what it is producing, and what is the Faradic efficiency, what is being the major product. So we can identify that. And also very similarly, we can do a control current. That means we fix the current, so we mandate the reaction rate, and we look at the energy input, so the voltage change. So let's say on the right hand side, we're controlling the current to 10 milliampere. So that's a reduction current, so it's -10. And then we can look at the voltage of the whole cell. And the whole cell is fixed at about -2.2 volts. And it's very constant. So this is the second method will be more practical in industry, because when we fix the current, the voltage is not subject to large change. But if you fix the voltage, the current is constantly changing, because there's some non-steady state about it. And this is perhaps very complicated, so I will read details, but there are different modes that you can do for a conversion. And in the end, you do product analysis, as I mentioned, and you can look at the stability of the system over a long time. So these are the methods that we generally do in our lab. And in the future, or what is happening in the field, is that we are trying to improve a lot on what I just mentioned. A lot of the things that we can do, some modification, some creative the change in the process, including we can lower the energy requirement by lowering the overpotential. And also we can increase the surface area. We can do a lot of interesting things on the surface. So on the right hand side, there's a very interesting idea that they're using a really thin layer of ionomer. And what ionomer is, it is a kind of polymer that can conduct electricity. So it's a conductive polymer. So when we deposit those kind of conductive polymer on the substrate, in this case, it's PDFE. So it's a kind of another type of polymer. So when we deposit on that, we can create a very thin surface for the CO2 to go in and become converted into product and then leave along the surface. So they're doing this very interesting design to control and to improve the reaction process. And so this is a very cutting edge science. And they can, by doing this, they can improve the surface, and they can improve the reaction rate to a really high number. So it's 1 amp currents, which is really high. And that being said, we are increasing the reaction rate, right? So there's also consideration on the downstream processing. So if you realize that we have a little mix of products, right? We have, other than the ones that we want to have, the C2 products, the ethanol, the propanol, we also have some like carbon monoxide or some other, even hydrogen. So we want to separate them. So there is a little extra work we need to put in for separation and then recycling of the electrolyte, because we want to recycle the solution and just extract the product out of the solution. So these are more engineering oriented. So they fall in the very classical category of process engineering or chemical engineering. So these are also the ways that we want to improve in the aspect we want to improve in the whole reaction scheme. And also we want to combine the anode reaction with the cathode reaction. So in the cathode we have CO2, but what can we do on the anode? We can also do some interesting thing, right? We can do something called hydroxy method for fluorooxidation. So that is what I am working on. So we can do that. We can also do a lot of like other stuff, interesting stuff, like treating wastewater, treating bio-waste, or improving biomass. So these are some ideas that we can combine the two and then just doing two things at the same time. So simultaneously reaching to very green chemistry. So that is what we can do in the future and what is actually being done now and what we want to achieve. So this is the whole picture of the lab work. And then I can discuss a little bit about my journey. So I started as a bachelor student in the McGill University in chemical engineering as well. And then I did an internship at Hatch company. It's an engineering consulting firm. And so that's where I start to get in touch with the actual work and also the industry aspect of the engineering, because you won't realize a lot of industry requirements and the standards unless you do an internship or you actually do a tour or just a visit in the plant. So you can see a lot of things, how things work and how you can apply your knowledge in the actual plant or actual industry. So that's very useful. And I would suggest if you consider doing an engineering degree in your undergrad or in your future study, you can try to do an internship or a co-op, and that helps a lot with understanding the application of your knowledge. So not just theoretical or textbook like. And then I also did some summer research projects in the faculty, and that's where I realized that I like doing research and doing lab work, and also just solving some really challenging problems in the realm of chemical engineering. So that is one of the project I was doing, the CO2RR. So that was the year before I graduated. So then I get into the Master of Engineering, and I started to do this electrochemistry research, and then share my knowledge with other students, and also work with PhD students. Very interesting lab work. And in middle and in between, I also did some peer mentorship. So I help with my peer and also my students in the courses such as some, chemical engineering design courses and biomedical engineering courses. So there are a lot of different aspects we learn in the chemical engineering curriculum, because we cover a lot from food processing to materials science to even biomedical engineering. So because a lot of stuff we're working on is transferable in between different aspects. We are looking at different physical models or different chemical fundamental theories that we can use in other area. Like the closest is material science, because in material science, there's a lot of chemistry, a lot of physics, and also in bio-related sciences or engineering. So these are some of the opportunities or some of the paths you can do with a chemical engineering degree. And so I hope if some of you want to do or like chemistry and chemical engineering and you want to go into this field, there are some various options you can choose in your career path. So I hope this is very helpful. And I wasn't looking at a time, but I think it's, yeah, okay, it's about 40 minutes, so that's good. And so if you have questions, feel free to drop your questions and I'll try to answer them.
Yeah, I don't see any in the chat so far.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions? Most of these participants have been here the whole time.
Yeah. It can be, I mean, general question. I think I probably go too fast.
Oh no, I'm sure it's fine.
A lot of.
Why did you pick Hatch specifically for
okay.
internship?
So because I want to experience something very different from classroom. So obviously I can do like lab related internship or R&D, but I want to try something very different. I want to see what is actually being done in the engineering firm setup. So I went into their technology development department. So what they're doing is a lot of pattern works, a lot of collaboration between because they're a consulting firm, so a lot of their partners, their customers. So it's very interesting, and I learn a lot from there. So I think it's just me trying to explore different options. So I choose them, and obviously I like that experience, and yeah, it helped me a lot.
So are you thinking about going back there after your master's or like PhD? Are you thinking maybe going?
Maybe that's one of the options. Yes, I like them very much, and I think they're one of the biggest consulting firm in Canada. So yes, it would be very nice if I go back to work and work for them. But I was also thinking about doing a PhD first. So yeah, maybe after PhD.
You could also do, I know with some PhD programs, you can do like your 2 years of master's and then 2 years of PhD. Is that an option that you're thinking of?
Not
Does
for
it
me right now
affect
because
your research?
yeah, I don't think it would affect too much, but the thing is that because I already started my master earlier this year, so I'm kind of in the middle. I can, yes, I can fast track. There's an option of fast tracking to PhD, but it doesn't save you a lot of time basically because I already started, and then it's just maybe saving you like one semester, and
Oh,
then
so
and then you don't get your master degree. Yeah, you need to go to the end to get the PhD, skipping master. So I would say, why not
so
just
then
get a
you
master first? And then, yeah,
gotcha. Okay.
yeah.
So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? You can either turn your mic off, like turn yourself off mute, or throw it in the chat. You know, the content was a little bit complicated.
Yes, I'm sorry because I did a lot of information in the slides. I put everything there. But
So,
yes, it is
one.
very interesting. If you have just very simple questions, I can also answer, like very simple ones, something
So,
related to high school. Yeah.
yeah, I've received a question. Has the methodology been used in industry yet?
Okay, so yeah, that's very interesting. So there are certain companies, there's a few companies that's actually doing CO2 reduction, but they're doing different, very different ways, different from our lab, at least. So some of them, I think some of them are very mature. They're converting into CO. So from CO2 to carbon monoxide. I think this is the simplest thing you can do because it's the easiest product you can produce in gas. But we're not very satisfied in that. So we want to do something more. We want to produce ethanol. We want to produce higher carbon containing molecules. So it becomes not biofuel, but it becomes fuel. And so then we can use it in the fuel sector. For that, I don't think there's any industrialized plant that can do that yet. It's still a very front end work. So it only started, the CO2 reduction only started to be popular in the past 10 years or so. So it's a very new field. Yeah.
Tony, does that answer your question, or do you have any follow-ups? He said thanks.
Okay.
Anyone else?
So I actually have a questions. Are all the students in their last year in high school or towards the last 2 years, maybe? Is there any like university or major major related questions or
Usually we
undergrad or
actually,
college?
yeah, sometimes we even have university students who join because they're wondering what to do
Oh,
even after university. So that's been pretty common.
right. Yeah.
But anyone,
Yes. Yes.
oh, we got another question. What do the companies do with the CO once it's produced?
Okay, so when they produce the carbon monoxide, they can collect it, pressurize it, and then use it as a gas feedstock for other processes, let's say fuel. So CO can also be a fuel in a gas form, or it can be some kind of precursor for further engineering or further chemistry processes. So they collect it and sell it to basically other industry that uses CO. Yeah, that's the model of, because you can't do everything by yourself. So they will collab with other industry partners. That's usually the way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So does anyone, I guess no one responded to your earlier question. Is anyone in high school like looking to, like thinking about doing a major in chemical engineering or anything else?
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit about my selection when I went to university, before I went to university. So I was always confused with science and engineering, right? So I applied for chemistry and chemical engineering because I like chemistry. So I was saying, okay, I perhaps also like chemical engineering, but barely having any idea about the difference between the two. I think that's actually very common. Maybe I asked other students in chemical engineering, yes, I like chemistry, so I applied to chemical engineering. But essentially, it is actually very different. So in chemistry, it's what we are thinking about chemistry. So it is a lot of design in molecule study and a lot of stuff like that. Very like micro scale stuff. But in engineering, everything is scaled up to like a factory. So like in the industry, it's a plant. So a lot of things are different working in macroscopic condition. So what we're trying to do is we apply the knowledge in chemistry, and we have scientific ways to scale it up to a large setup. And in between, we consider a lot of physical properties. So it's not in chemistry, it's a lot of physics. So you have to have really good physics background, or you like physics, you like to solve a physical problem, then that will be transferred to the final destination, like the plant or just a process. So I would say in chemical engineering, it's more process oriented instead of molecular design oriented. You can also do that, but the focus is more on the later one, the process, the large scale. So yeah, so that's the, I would say that's the biggest difference. So it depends on what your interest is. If you like doing a lot of molecular design work, then you can perhaps think about chemistry or material science. And if you like to be working with a lot of machines and a lot of processing tools, then engineering is definitely more suitable. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the distinction. I'm sure that helps a lot of people, especially in high school. You like don't know what's going on usually.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
someone in the field.
that's
Okay,
my case.
that's usually the case, I think. And then once people get, especially with engineering, it's tough. So once people get there,
Yes.
they don't usually know what it
And math, yeah,
and
you
math.
need to
Yeah.
be really good at math. Yes, a lot of math
Yeah,
courses.
high school math is very different from undergrad math for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the difficulty level just okay, so I think that's all the time we have for today. If anyone has any questions, can they email
Right.
you?
Of course, yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Roger.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, have a good day, everybody.
See you. Have a good day.